The net felt heavier than it should have. Way heavier. Jake had been fishing this river for over 20 years. He knew every current, every pull, every resistance. But this was different. He cut the engine, leaned over the edge of the boat, and looked down into the murky brown water. Something was clinging to the net. Not one thing, dozens. Round, pale, pulsating. He'd never seen anything like them in his life. Neither had anyone else on that river. He started pulling them up, one by one, into the boat. His hands were shaking by the third one. By the 10th, he stopped counting. And when he finally called for help, the man on the other end of the phone went completely silent. Because what Jake had dragged out of that river that morning wasn't supposed to exist here. Not in this water, not in this country, not on this side of the world. But what hatched from those eggs made him walk away from the river forever. If you've never seen anything like this before, you won't want to miss what comes next. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story gets a lot stranger. It started like any other Tuesday morning. Jake launched his boat just before dawn. The Blackwater River, rural Tennessee, a place so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. He'd done this route 1,000 times. Same bends, same banks, same stillness. But that morning, the water looked different. Darker, almost thick. He didn't think much of it at first. He dropped his net near the shallow bend, his usual spot, and waited. 15 minutes passed. Then he started pulling. And that's when his arms locked up. The net wouldn't budge. He pulled harder. The boat tilted slightly. Something beneath the surface was holding on. He killed the motor, grabbed both hands on the line, and heaved. What broke the surface stopped him cold. They weren't fish. They weren't rocks. They were eggs, clustered together in a thick, webbed mass. Each one the size of a man's fist. Translucent, pale, with something dark moving inside. Jake counted 10, then 20, then stopped counting. There were hundreds of them, tangled deep into his net like they'd been growing there for months. He grabbed one carefully. It was warm, not river warm, warm like something alive. He set it down in the hull of the boat. It didn't roll. It pulsed. Jake pulled out his phone and filmed it. His hand was shaking so badly, the footage was barely watchable. But when he zoomed in on the dark shape moving inside, he dropped the phone and took a full step back, because whatever was growing inside that egg had just turned toward the camera. Jake didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. He'd loaded 17 of the eggs into a cooler and brought them home. The rest, still tangled in the net, he'd left anchored in the shallows. He told himself he'd figure it out in the morning. But morning came fast, and the eggs had already started changing. The ones in the cooler were darker now. The pale, translucent shell had turned a deep gray overnight, and the movement inside, it was stronger, more deliberate. Jake called his buddy Ray, a retired wildlife officer, and told him to come over. Ray walked in, looked down at the cooler, and didn't say a word for a long moment. Then he crouched down slowly, pulled on a rubber glove, and pressed 2 fingers against the shell. He pulled his hand back immediately. "Jake," he said quietly, "where exactly did you find these?" Jake told him. "The shallow bend, the usual spot." Ray stood up and walked to the window. That's when everything changed. "That part of the river," Ray said, "it's been closed to wildlife for 3 years." Jake frowned. "Closed for what?" Ray didn't answer right away. He just picked up his phone and made a call. Jake only heard one side of the conversation, but the word Ray used, twice, was enough to make his stomach drop. Invasive. Before Jake could ask anything else, a sound came from the cooler. Low, wet, rhythmic, like something scratching from the inside. All 17 eggs, at the exact same time. Ray hung up the phone. He told Jake to step away from the cooler. Jake didn't move. "Ray, what is it?" Ray just shook his head slowly. "They're sending someone." 20 minutes later, 2 trucks pulled into Jake's driveway. No markings, no uniforms, Just 4 men in gray jackets carrying equipment cases. They didn't introduce themselves. They walked straight past Jake like he wasn't standing there. One of them opened the cooler, looked inside, and immediately snapped it shut. He turned to the others and said 3 words. Jake couldn't hear them, but he watched the color drain from Ray's face. They loaded the cooler into the back of the second truck. Jake stepped forward. "Those are mine. I pulled them out." The man in front turned and looked at him calmly. "Mr. Jake, you need to take us to the exact location, right now." It wasn't a question. They were back on the river within the hour, and what they found at the shallow bend stopped every single one of them dead. The remaining eggs in the net, the ones Jake had left anchored overnight, had already hatched. Every single one. The net was shredded. The shells were empty and split open along the bank. But that wasn't the worst part. The water around the bend was moving, not from the current, from beneath. Dozens of dark shapes, fast, low, hugging the riverbed, moving upstream, together. One of the men grabbed Jake's arm hard. "How far does this river run through your town?" Jake felt his throat tighten. "About 11 miles, he said. The man turned back to the water and quietly said, "We're too late." They pulled Jake into one of the trucks, showed him a photograph on a tablet. He stared at it for a long moment. "What am I looking at?" he asked. So the man across from him leaned forward. "What you pulled out of that river? Those eggs?" He paused. "They belong to a snakehead." Jake blinked. "A fish? Not just any fish." The man pulled up another image. A creature long as a man's arm, thick, armored-looking. Rows of teeth that curved inward like fishhooks. "The northern snakehead," the man said. "Originally from China and Korea. It doesn't belong in American water. It has no natural predators here. And it doesn't just swim." He let that last line sit in the air. Jake looked up. "What do you mean it doesn't just swim?" The man turned the tablet around again. A video this time. Jake watched a snakehead drag itself across dry land. On its fins, moving between 2 ponds separated by 40 feet of grass, breathing air, surviving outside water for up to 4 days. Jake sat back hard against the seat, because 11 miles of river ran directly behind the elementary school, past the public park, through the edge of town, and these things were already moving. But then the man said something that hit harder than any of it. "Jake, a single snakehead pair can produce up to 150,000 eggs per season." Jake looked out the truck window at the river, silent, dark, still on the surface, and thought about how long that net had been sitting in that water, untouched, unnoticed. The river was closed by nightfall. Official signage, barrier tape, state wildlife vehicles parked every quarter mile. By the next morning, it was on the local news. By the afternoon, national outlets had picked it up. Jake's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in town knew. The Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency confirmed what the men in gray jackets wouldn't say out loud. A breeding population of northern snakeheads had established itself in the Blackwater River. Not one pair, not 2, several, spread across nearly 8 miles of waterway. Experts said it had likely been building for 2 full seasons, right beneath everyone's feet, undetected. Wildlife teams worked the river for 11 straight days. Electrofishing, net drags, chemical treatment in isolated sections. They removed over 400 individual snakeheads, but the lead biologist said something quietly at the end of that press briefing, something that got very little coverage. "We are confident we've reduced the population significantly. Not eliminated, reduced." Jake watched that press briefing alone in his kitchen. He didn't go back to the river. And not that week, not that month. He sold his boat in the spring, told his neighbor he just needed a break. But Ray knew the real reason. It wasn't fear of the fish. It was what Jake kept thinking about every time he closed his eyes. That first egg in the hull of the boat, the way it pulsed, the dark shape inside, turning toward the camera, like it knew it was being watched. Some things don't stay hidden because they can't be found. They stay hidden because they're not ready to be seen. And by the time Jake found them, they were already ready. If this story kept you hooked till the very end, you already know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, because the next discovery is already waiting.